Welcome back to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast. Today, we are talking about something that I think has come up a lot in the last couple weeks because we've been doing instructor and therapist observation week at Hetra, and we do those quarterly. So if you're curious about what that means, I will link the episode where we talk all about observation week. Strictly about that, so you can scroll down and listen to that. But basically, we're just watching every session to make sure, like for instructors, that all the participants, are good matches and they're progressing and that everybody's safe and just having good lessons overall. So, one thing that came up a little bit was this piece of lesson planning. And so I have a special guest today that's going to help me talk about that. Our lead instructor, Cassidy Fredrickson. Welcome, Cassidy.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, do you want to tell, just give people a little feel about who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Cassidy Fredrickson. I am an occupational therapist and the lead instructor here at Hetra. I do all things miniature horses as well, but today I'm going to really be focusing on my lead instructor hat today.
Very good. So, everybody knows about lesson planning, how we're, as instructors, no matter who you were certified by, we should be thinking ahead about our lessons and constructing a good lesson plan. Things like, what do I need for my lesson? Like,
Right, like what stuff are you going to have in the arena? Because you don't want to have things that you're not going to be using, because then those will just get in the way. So, from lesson to lesson, are you using the same things?
what
What kind?
volunteers, what horses, all
Exactly.
that kind of stuff. And every lesson should have an objective or a goal. I think most people understand that. They should go into their lessons with, what's the goal of this lesson that I'm teaching? But there is a critical piece that I think a lot of instructors miss, and that is skill progression.
That's a very, very, it's a tricky
It
one.
is tricky.
It
It
can be
is
tricky,
tricky.
especially with the individuals that we work with all the time.
Mhm.
Because we have those individuals that will progress quickly, but
Mhm.
then we also have those individuals that won't progress very fast at all.
Yeah.
They might take a year to learn a skill,
Mhm. And
but
it's more like looks more like baby steps than giant leaps and bounds.
right.
Why do you think progressing someone within a lesson is so important?
Because if you're never progressing somebody within a lesson, then you're never working towards the next steps.
Right.
So if you're not pushing and working and figuring out, what do I need to teach this individual in order to get to that next step, you're never going to get there.
Right. And I think it's important to build our participants' confidence over time within those baby steps because if we came in hot every single lesson with a brand new skill,
Right.
I mean, that's overwhelming and not safe, number one. But number two, not going to set your participants up for as much success. Whereas the kind of progression we're talking about is like, you come in with your writing skill and it might be a brand new skill that day, it really might, but ideally we're reviewing previous skill or we're reviewing skills that help us with a
Right.
new skill, right? We're kind of like building that up a little bit in the first part of our lesson
Mhm.
and then introducing something more difficult.
Right. And you're practicing it.
Yeah.
Practice makes perfect. So, yes, I might have gone over passing last week, but, we're probably going to need to go over passing for several weeks in order to get everybody in the group fully comfortable with it.
Right.
So, are we passing at, you know, all right, Kevin's going to go past Teddy. Teddy, halt your horse, come to a whoa. Okay, now Kevin can practice passing
Hmm.
while Teddy's at a halt. Okay, so then maybe you can take it to the next step of, all right, so now this time we're going to practice passing while everybody's still walking.
Hmm.
And if you have participants that struggle with their spacing, you can take it even a further step back before you're passing each other and you're playing leapfrog. You can just set out two cones and say, this is the front of my horse, this is the back of my horse. everybody, let's go practice passing my fake horse.
Yeah. I saw you do that in a lesson last week and I was like, that's so smart. Because it helps build, like, not only are you introducing that skill so that they can learn something new, but also doing it safely
Mm-hmm.
and building confidence in them. Because then it's like, oh my gosh, Teddy, you did so good passing our, fake cone horse. I love that. Now let's try it with this. Let's try it with, our other participant in the class or whatever it is. That just gives you more opportunity for positive reinforcement, which is gold. That's what we like in a
Well,
lesson.
and if you think about like a lot of our participants, some of them, like we said, are going to take a little longer to learn something. So, like giving them that opportunity to have the time that they need, to work on it and work on it and work on it until they get comfortable is really key.
Right. And I mean, it obviously goes back to what are these participants' goals? And you're going to write realistic goals for those participants. And we're not going to, write, long-term goals for our participants that don't make sense or we don't think are achievable within a specific time frame. But that's a whole nother conversation we could get into. In fact, we did a 1 hour webinar on goal writing for adaptive writing students. So if that's something that interests you in writing, attainable, specific, measurable goals for adaptive writing specifically, I'll link that webinar in the show notes below. So you can go check that out. But I mean, goals, yes, have to do with your objective of the lesson, but they're not always the objective of your lesson, right? It's
Right.
like these objectives are like the baby steps that it takes you to get to your long-term goal. This episode is sponsored by Equiforce. Equiforce is a database that allows you to track every facet of your organization, from horse, donor, and volunteer management to scheduling, grant tracking, incident reports, and tracking participant progress, too. This is not a one-size-fits-all setup. Instead, Equiforce personally works with you to learn how your facility functions and takes note of your specific terminology so that they can create a unique system to match the needs of your organization. And of course, Equiforce provides an ongoing training and support so that your database can grow with you. Visit them at www.equiforce.com. That's EQUI-FORCE.com. And so I guess what would be most helpful is maybe talking about some examples. Like, okay, so you talked about the posting trot earlier. We could kind
Mm-hmm.
of maybe run with that. And let's talk about there's like, I don't know, 5 different ways for us to upgrade a task. And we'll kind of like break those down and maybe relate them. You can help me relate them to the posting trot.
Okay.
Actually, let's take it a step further and let's talk about posting the correct diagonals
Okay.
because that's
Okay.
kind of a complex skill.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. So like what are diagonals and why do we do them? And like
Right.
talking about that and building that backstory, I think is really important too for our participants.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like a small slice of it.
Right, because your participants are going to be like, why do I have to make sure I'm with this certain leg?
Yeah.
Well, because you balance and helps them balance. And um,
So what's a way you might warm up the posting trot? Like you kind of introducing this skill, you're like, let's just say our participants, we talked about it maybe a little bit last week, and now we're gonna warm up this skill. What are some ways that you might do that?
so I'm gonna start at the walk. I'm a big 777 person, so
Mm.
I want to know how their rhythm is. And that is 7 sitting strides, 7 2-point strides, and then 7 posting strides.
Mm-hmm.
And that really helps them get back into the rhythm of their horse. And then just helping that balance as well, getting warmed up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
then we can start working on that diagonal. So then we're going to introduce that diagonal and knowing kind of like which leg they're
Yeah.
watching and
So all this stuff is going to be review. I mean, we're kind of warming up, we're finding the rhythm, we're getting in tune with our horse.
Mhm.
We're reviewing how to find our correct diagonal. This is maybe stuff that we reviewed like in the next week and maybe they get to practice it. We warm up the trot, we warm up the posting trot, and then now we're going to try diagonals, right?
Right.
So as we progress this lesson, it depends a lot on what your participants' skill levels are, how many participants, yada, yada, yada. But we're going to talk about pretty much just like in general. We're not going to focus so much on the posting trot, as we are ways to upgrade a task.
Right.
So you could move from, we're all warmed up, we're all ready to rock and roll. We got this diagonal thing figured out. We're ready. We're going
Mhm.
to upgrade this task.
So you're getting comfortable and you're just going in the same direction. Okay, now let's add, maybe we're going to do a figure eight. So we're going to
Mm.
go through the middle, and every time we go through the middle, that's where we're changing a diagonal.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you one step further,
Okay.
Cassidy. She's upgrading times 2.
Oh boy.
See? That's good though. That's good though. So you can upgrade the posting trot simply by adding, for the diagonals, simply by adding it into a schooling pattern of any kind of pattern.
Mhm.
It could be, maybe half the pattern is walk based and then they pick up the trot and then pick up their diagonal. Anything, you can upgrade a task by increasing the cognitive load in any way. So when I say cognitive load, I mean like they're multitasking. They're
Right.
thinking about lots of things. Like you added the figure eight because that's steering and posting and
Right.
diagonals,
And you have to
right?
change your diagonal.
Yeah. So adding that cognitive load piece where they have to think about multiple things, and picking it up and moving around objects and raining, that increases the cognitive load. But then you also added a skill, which is really good. We can learn diagonals and which correct diagonal to be on, but now we're going to talk about switching diagonals
Right.
and what does it mean to switch and where and why do we do that and all of that stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We got to make sure that we're on the same one. We're on the correct one, I
So
should say.
you're picking up, it's the same, skill family, but now you're adding the complexity, right? Same thing with like adding complexity with transitions. So being able to pick up that diagonal right away when you pick up the trot, that is something, oof, I struggle with.
Right.
Is picking the correct diagonal up right away. That's another way to kind of increase the complexity of that skill. Other things that you can do, increasing the speed of the gait. So you said that from
Kind of
walk.
slowing it down and controlling your post and, half halting to help control that horse to come down to a slower,
Hmm.
or extending that gait out, doing
Hmm.
kind of a bigger posting trot.
Yeah. Working at the walk at the post and working at the trot at the post are two very different animals that you would use for very different reasons,
Yeah.
but increases complexity really in either direction. Another way I like to increase complexity, and kind of progress my students is requiring reflection on a
Hmm.
task. So a lot of
That's hard.
it is super hard. So if you look at like the pyramid of learning or whatever, it's like
Okay.
you know it so well that
Oh, then you can
you
teach
can
it
teach it
and
to
then
other
you like learn
people.
it better.
Yeah, so that's conscious competent. I know what I'm doing and I know how to do it and I can show other people how to do it. So that adds the complexity once they get to that level of learning. So being able to say, how do you think you did? Are you on the correct diagonal?
Mhm.
Or watching maybe the other participant in the arena, were they on the correct diagonal? Because watching a horse from across the arena and being able to tell if they're on the right diagonal is different than when you're riding and you can see it, right?
Right.
So, like, any kind of reflection is a higher level learning task. Making sure.
You're really good at, you're right. She did struggle to get that sit back up,
Hmm.
and you do really well at that. What is something that you do to
Mm,
help,
I like it.
make that a more balanced transition?
Which helps your participants like work together as a team, but also help build that learning. And you want to make sure your participants are comfortable with that, right?
100%,
Yeah,
right.
being able to accept feedback from peers and that sort of thing, but a really good skill to have. Um, of course, the like one like major thing probably that everyone was thinking about we haven't said yet, but like just decreasing your assistance level for it, right? Like if you're calling up down or left
Right.
right or
Like,
whatever
how
you're
far into
calling.
it are you? Are you still
Yeah.
giving them that feedback? Is the horse leader
Hooked or unhooked, I mean,
right?
and
I
being
guess
really dependent.
when I first take and do some posting trot with somebody, like I love to put them on a lunge line,
That's a
because
good
then
one.
you take away that running burden away from your horse
Mhm.
leader. I can control the direction, I can control the pace, I can control everything. You just have to worry about your post.
Yeah. And that's again like reducing that cognitive load. Like you don't have to worry about steering, you don't have to worry about pace.
Mhm.
Let me do all that stuff for you. You just focus on up and down.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's So that's a simple way to increase or decrease your progression or your difficulty. What about English versus Western for posting,
Oh
Cassidy?
gosh. I think that's a very, very big way to challenge them because obviously, in your Western saddle, you have your fenders that help keep your legs more in
Mhm.
position.
Your
And
big old
then,
pommel and
you have that pommel to kind of like as you come up, if you come too far up, it kind of blocks you back down.
Mhm.
That's definitely a bigger challenge. And I mean, if you want to take it a step further, you get close without stirrups. But wow,
Oof.
good luck.
Oof.
And
That's
it is no stirrup November right now.
super, super advanced. Too advanced for me. Um, so obviously we're not suggesting that you do all of these
Oh,
things in
yes.
one lesson, right? So you choose one. You choose, one thing to kind of help progress that posting trot from warming that up to this is the skill to now let's continue to add complexity because next week when they come into their lesson, they're going to be that much better at it. They're going to have that much better of a skill and you can just keep adding and adding and adding and achieving those skills to work towards their goals, right? Come join us in Gretna, Nebraska for a hands on EAS workshop March 13th through the 15th in 2025. As the EAS industry continues to expand and diversify, it is of utmost importance to keep the needs of our equine partners a priority. At our workshop, get a comprehensive look at all the aspects of successful equine welfare, including appropriate equine selection, proper training, conditioning, and integration into programming, learn how to do practical saddle fit for EAS, set weight limits for your horses, and so much more. Equine welfare strategies are hard to learn while sitting in a desk at a regular conference. We believe in the power of hands on practice with equine skills in a collaborative environment where we can learn from each other. Attendees should expect a combination of valuable hands on experience with our horses, classroom based education, and individualized coaching to help solidify the workshop content. Get the entire 2.5 days of content for just $125 with our early bird registration discount available till January 1st. Discounts are available for audit-only positions as well as scholarship opportunities. If you're a member of our exclusive club at Patreon, make sure to use your additional $25 discount code. To register and get all the details, head over to hetrauniversity.org or click the link in the show notes below. We hope to see you in Gretna this March. So, here's my question. This all sounds great. Progressing skills, progressing riders safely. What about our participants who are sort of they're maintaining their skills. It sort of feels like as we write goals for them that we're kind of stuck. How do we progress those students that their progression is very much more baby steps?
Yeah, so that is a tricky one. I have a few of those.
I think the biggest question for me is the why part, right? So it's like if you have a participant that hasn't met a goal in a year, or you're just feeling sort of like, where am I going to take this participant next? I would encourage all of our instructors listening to ask yourself why. Why is it? Is it
Hmm.
because of their safety awareness, or like cognition, wise? Is it they can't be unhooked because, of that safety kind of cognitive piece? Or is
Hmm.
it because they don't have the strength in their, lower legs to be able to really use their leg aids or leg cues effectively? What is it that you feel
Right.
like is holding them back? And then that can help make the next baby steps a little bit easier. At the end of the day, I mean, we're instructors teaching horsemanship skills, and there are 4 billion things that happen between walk on and whoa with a leader hooked on and being completely independent, right? I think
Right.
this is where a lot of instructors get stuck and where end up with lessons where it's just patterns after patterns after patterns at the walk or finding rings or whatever. And I'm not saying that's not a great thing to work on and can be really super fun. But what other aspects of horsemanship can we work on to help them build independence? Maybe even if they are quote I'm going to say quote unquote stuck, but I don't mean that in a negative sense of the way. I just mean
Right.
if there is kind of a barrier to that completely unhooked cantering type of independence that everybody I think kind of thinks about, what can we do in between?
Right. So, have they ever groomed and untacked their horse before?
Mhm.
What about those other pieces of taking care of your horse?
Exactly. Like an independent horseman or woman takes care of their horse from the whole spectrum. And I know not everybody wants to ride, right? But
Right.
on those days that you can't ride, or things happen, what other aspects of horsemanship can we put in there? Like, first aid or horse communication. That's a huge part of being able to ride independently is being able to read your horse.
Right, right. And that you can work on the ground and then bring it to your lesson the next week and say, oh, Emma, look at what did we talk about last week when Jimmy's ears go forward?
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff is good. If we talk about being mounted, there's like a slew of things that are just kind of coming to my mind that you can still do with a horse leader hooked on that you might not be trotting, you might be doing any of those things, but depending on what kind of the why is for why you feel like that participant can't move forward, being able to manage all the different parts of your horse's body,
Hmm.
hind crossovers, forehand turns, that kind of stuff.
When you are, maybe we will get unhooked. Do you know what to do in like an emergency situation?
That's a really good one.
Make sure you're like always holding onto your reins. So a lot of times these individuals, they're used to maybe completing some patterns and going and collecting some fun stuff. Well, then they get to a location and their first thing they do is drop their reins.
hmm
That is a big skill to just keep your reins in your hands
Huge skill.
and keep your reins in an active position in your hands. So are they holding their reins and they're active above the saddle, or are they just resting on the saddle and they're just kind of hanging out?
Right. Yeah, I mean, just little things like that, like feet in and out of stirrups. That kind of goes back to emergency, stuff too. If you're riding completely unhooked with no sidewalkers or horse leaders or anybody and you're just out there and you have a horse emergency, can you get your feet out to or into your stirrups,
Hmm.
if no one's there to help you? Even just accuracy in skills that they do have, like increasing the accuracy of halting or reining, adding complexity to precision to those patterns, like you said earlier, like backing an L or
Right.
things like that. Like how can you add precision, more precision to the skills they already have? Half halting, I mean, all kinds of stuff that you can work on at the walk or trotted hooked on the lunge line. You talked about that too.
Mhm.
There's just a lot that goes into it, and progressing your participants within your lesson is really important, even if you have to drill down a little bit further into what that participant can do, is capable of, and will achieve.
And if you figure out that why and you figure out, oh, well, this is kind of what's holding them back, maybe in a few months, you're working towards that. And then they do make that big step that you didn't think they were going to be able to do. And
Mhm.
that's going to make them one step closer to independence.
That's right. And we celebrate those things no matter how big or small they seem to us. It's just the further we can move our participants along, the better, as long as they're having a good, safe time.
Right, exactly.
The broader picture of this is to just have a really high quality lesson plan. And
Right.
we talked about that in a webinar that we did. Love this for instructors in training or anybody that just needs a good reminder on just really thinking critically about all the pieces that go into making a good lesson. How much help? What kind of help? What's your what order do you mount or dismount your participants in, for efficiency of your lesson? And how do you write a good lesson objective? And, all of those things are things that ultimately yield more safe, higher quality lessons. It just requires a little bit of thought every once in a while.
Right. And kind of helps you organize your lesson more as well. So
Yeah.
if you go out there and especially because we're not always lucky enough to have writers in a lesson that are exactly the same or
Right.
progressing at the
Absolutely.
same pace.
hmm
So having a little bit of organization around, okay, yes, Emma is hooked on with a horse leader still, and Gina is unhooked now, but how can we still progress them? So you can still work them together, but it's really important to have that organized before.
hmm
So you're going in and you're having that successful lesson because 30 minutes goes by fast.
It does go by fast, yeah. And sometimes it's a deal where you have to have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and, and it doesn't go as well as you thought it was going to, but at least if you have somewhere to start, it makes it that much easier. So if you have anybody that you're thinking of that might really benefit from additional information on that, or you want to check it out yourself, we went into a whole hour of really high quality lesson planning in a webinar. So I will link that in the show notes below. Check out the lesson planning webinar or the goal writing for adaptive writing webinar. Both of those were awesome and good content for any instructor, or especially those that are in training or looking to increase the quality of their lessons. So, well, thank you for meeting with me today, Cassidy.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's always great.
Stay tuned for more.
That's all for today, but until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the Hetra University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.